Now that you have a sense for how control handles work inside Illustrator, let me show you how to draw smooth points using the pen tool. And you may recall smooth points are those kinds of points that have opposing control handles that are moving in lockstep with each other. So I've gone ahead and restored the saved version of that file, ellipseexercise.ai. So we only have the guidelines. Make sure the ellipse layer is selected, and then go ahead and grab the pen tool, which you can get by pressing the P key. Now, notice that we have a little asterisk next to the cursor, which is telling us that we're going to start a new shape. And what I want you to do is drag from the intersection of the center guide right there and the top guide as well. And notice that the center guides, the vertical and horizontal center guides, are longer than the other ones. They cover the entire artboards. I want you to start dragging there. So click and drag. And notice now what's happened. The click point, I'll go ahead and point back at it there, that's the anchor point. And as I drag away, I'm positioning the control handle on its lever. Not only am I positioning the control handle that's directly below my cursor over on the right side of the screen, but I'm also positioning the opposite control handle in a symmetrical direction at this point. When you're first creating a smooth point, the two control handles are absolutely symmetrical to each other. Now I want you to go ahead and lay that control handle down at that next guide intersection over. So in other words, I've dragged from this point right there to the right to the next vertical guide intersection. And as a result, I have a smooth point. So I'll go ahead and press Control semicolon for a moment, Command semicolon on the Mac, so you can see that smooth point. That's what it looks like. And currently, the control handles are exactly horizontal, and that will end up delivering for us an exact ellipse. All right, I'm going to press Control semicolon, Command semicolon again in order to bring back my guides. This time, I want you to drag from this guide intersection, that is the point at which the far right vertical guide meets the center horizontal guide, and I want you to click and drag again, and this time I want you to drag down. And the reason I'm having you drag down, even though it's tempting to do this number where you drag up because you might think, gosh, this control handle that I'm creating should control the previous segment or the one that's being created on the fly. Rather, you're working in the opposite direction. You're worried about your next control handle. You use the opposing control handle, the one that's up above and moving on its own. You use it in order to control the curvature of the segment in progress. So in other words, I'll go ahead and lay this handle down here at the next horizontal guide intersection down, as you can see right there. And we end up with this perfect arc. I'm going to press Control semicolon or Command semicolon again in order to hide those guides. So the idea is I'm continuing to drag in the same direction. So in other words, I started by creating my shape in a clockwise direction. That is, I dragged from this anchor point over to the right. And now that I determine that I'm creating the shape clockwise, I need to continue in a clockwise direction, which is why I clicked right about here at 3 o'clock or so and dragged down. All right, now I'm going to press Control semicolon, Command semicolon on the Mac to bring back my guides. And I'm going to drag down here at 6 o'clock, as you can see, over to the left. Because again, I'm continuing in that clockwise direction that I established at the outset. And I'll go ahead and release in order to create a control handle at this location right there. If I press Control semicolon or Command semicolon on the Mac to turn off those guides, you can see that Illustrator went ahead and automatically positioned the previous control handle, which is controlling how the segment enters that anchor point. So this control handle controlled how the segment exits this anchor point, and this control handle down here at the bottom controls how the segment enters the bottom anchor point. All right, we have just one more anchor point to create here. Press Control semicolon or Command semicolon on the Mac in order to bring back my guides. And now I'll drag at the intersection of the far left guide and the horizontal center guide. And I'll go ahead and drag up, again, continuing in this counterclockwise direction. So the opposing anchor point is controlling the segment in progress. The anchor point under my cursor will control the next segment I create. I'll go ahead and release at this guide intersection in order to position that anchor point. And now we need to close the shape. And notice, if I move my cursor over that first endpoint, I'll see a little circle telling me that I'm going to close the shape. However, I don't just want to click And one of the reasons I mention this is because in other Adobe applications, such as Photoshop, that works just fine. That'll go ahead and close your shape with a smooth point. In Illustrator, it does not. You have to do something that I regard as a little bit wacky. It's not necessarily intuitive when you start using the program. I'll press Control-Z or Command-Z on a Mac to undo that change. Notice that my path outline is still active because I'm not seeing any special symbol next to my pen tool cursor. So I'll go ahead and click and drag from this top anchor point, and I'm not dragging in the direction of the segment that I'm making, but rather I'm dragging in the opposite direction again. So in other words, I have to remake this control handle, the one I already made right at the outset of the shape. I have to go and redraw it, and that positions the previous control handle, or that is to say the opposing control handle, which is controlling the final segment in the shape. And then I'll go ahead and release my cursor at this guide intersection right there, and the result is an absolutely perfect ellipse. A couple of things I want you to note about this elliptical shape that we've drawn. I'm going to press Control semicolon or Command semicolon on the Mac in order to hide those guidelines. And I'm going to press the V key to switch to the black arrow tool, click anywhere on the path outline to select the entire thing. And then, so we can just see the control handles, I'll go up to the Select menu, choose Object, and choose Direction Handles. The question becomes, and this will become a very important question as you begin using the pen tool, why in the world is this shape so darn smooth? Because once you start drawing your own smooth path outlines using the pen tool, you may run into problems where things don't look nearly as smooth as you hope they would, and the stuff you see me doing looks so much more smooth, and what's going on there? Well, there's two rules to bear in mind. The first one is every segment, if it's going to curve, needs two control handles, one determining how the segment exits the anchor point and another determining how the segment enters the next anchor point. You have to have two control handles. If you don't, you're going to get flatness in your curves. They're going to start looking weird. The other thing is if you want really smooth path outlines, you want the control handle to be about a third of the length of the entire segment. And so you can see this first control handle is about a third of the length of the segment, and the second control handle is about a third of the length of the segment as well. More to the point, and I know this sounds weird, but they're almost exactly 35% of the length and the height of the segment. So if you were to figure out the exact length and height of the segment as measured as a perimeter, so the full length of the line, not the size of the bounding box or anything like that, then you would find that this guy is nearly exactly 35% the length of this segment, and this guy is almost 35% the height. And that's not something I expect you to measure. Just bear in mind that's approximately 1/3. So you want to be covering about 2/3 of your segment in these two control handles, and about a third of the length of the segment should remain open. So again, the two big rules are 2 segments per every curved segment. If you don't want curvature, then have 0 control handles associated with that segment. So that's all there is to it, 0 or 2. Those are your options. And each control handle should cover about a third each of the length of the segment. And we'll see these rules implemented as we draw our own custom path outline starting in the next movie.